Hello everybody and welcome. I am the Shy Hat and we're doing HackerFrogs AfterSchool Python Programming Basics Part 3. Alright, so to everybody here, please say hi in the chat if you're here to learn some Python. I've got, I did my settings for the stream a little bit different today, so you should be able to respond a lot quicker when I ask you to answer questions or type in chat. But we'll see how it goes. I'm going to say 1, and when you hear the word 1, please type the word. Please type please type 1 in the chat after I say 1. So everybody, ready? 1. Lela F says, hello Lela F. Are you new to this HackerFrogs AfterSchool, this particular program? Alright, so that was maybe a 10 or 15 second delay. I'll have to keep that in mind. Alright, so yeah, I don't think I've seen you here before, Layla. Have you been learning Python on your own or with Gina before this? Are you also a member of Black Girls Hack? Layla F says, this is my second session. Oh, sorry, if I don't recognize your name, I'm sorry about that. Sometimes my memory is kind of bad. But without further ado, let's jump into today's lesson. So we're going to be learning more about Python. And if necessary, you can use the learnpython.org website, or you can use JS Linux to start experimenting. Layla says they are with Gina's group and they are members of BGH. Well, welcome to you. I'm leaving a link to the JS Linux virtual machine that you can access in the web browser. And if you want to, you can use that to play around with Python as we go through our lesson. All right, so what are we talking about? We're talking about Python today. This is the third class for Intro to Python Programming. During our last workshop, we learned about a few programming concepts through Python, including the following. So we learned about string formatting. So string formatting is a way for us to include variable values in strings by using C-style syntax. So we were able to... Oh, let me turn on my mouse highlighting. Just a second. I think I can access my app from here. Okay, great. That makes it a lot easier for you guys to see what I'm pointing at. Okay, so when you print the string, instead of the variable, you put this %s, and the %s, you put % at the end, and then you add the names of the variables that you want to print in the string over here. That's how you print string. You print stuff in a C-style format. Alright, we also learned about basic string operations. So we had our strings and we were able to do different stuff with them. Strings in Python have a number of different functions and methods that can be useful for obtaining specific details about the strings. We can also output slices of strings through string indexing. So we learned about how to split strings into different slices and get only certain parts of those strings through string indexing. And we learned about conditions. So conditions are used in programs to determine a program's course of action. They rely on the evaluation of Boolean statements to determine if certain instructions are performed or not. So new for this session, we're going to cover Part 1, Programming Loops, Part 2, Functions, and Part 3, Classes and Objects. So while we're working through today's workshop, if you have any questions or any comments about anything you see, please feel free to type in the chat. and I'll try to address your questions and comments. I do a lot of talking during this workshop, but I want this to be kind of a conversation where it can be. So please feel free to add your own commentary or questions whenever you want to. All right, so with that out of the way, we're going to do part 1, programming loops. So programming loops are very common to every programming language. They're tools that programmers use to run the same instructions multiple times. This is a typical syntax for a programming loop over here in Python. For I in range, for print I. So what this is going to do is this is going to print I, where I is going to be a range of numbers. So the numbers are going to be from 1 to 3. Whenever you use this this kind of syntax in range, the range is a function that has a number of numbers in it. So in this case, the range is 4, and that means there's going to be 4 numbers, and it starts counting at 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3. This loop is going to print I 4 times, which is going to go from 0 to 3. Okay? So here the code repeats the instructions 4 times for each time the value of I is printed. The first time I is 0, then it's 1, then it's 2, then it's 3. It stops before the number 4 because it started counting from 0. There are 2 major categories of loops in Python. There's the for loop and the while loop. We'll cover for loops first. So for loops are instructions that repeat for each item in a set. The loop stops after the instructions have been performed on all items in the set. So in the for loop, we always know how many times it's going to happen because it's usually going to iterate through it's usually going to iterate through a list. So we supply a list. So we supply a list over here. So the list is this range function, which is 4. And then it's going to do that a number of times for each thing in the list. And it's going to do something each time that the loop iterates. Okay? So any object that can be referenced by index can be used in a for loop, including strings. So we can do, instead of a list, we can supply a string for the for loop. So for example, there's this variable called frog, and in this case, frog is a string. And the string is composed of 1, 2, 3, 4 letters. So for I in animal, and animal is the string frog, it's going to print I. So any object that can be referenced by index can be used in a, I just said that. So it's going to iterate through F, R, O, and G, and it's going to print each one of those letters. Okay? So to write a for loop, we're going to begin with the keyword for, then a variable name that is only used inside the loop. Typically, they use the letter I, and then in, and then the name of the object to be iterated over, then a colon. So we see here that this is the object to be iterated over. So range 10, this is a list of 10 objects. So inside of this list, we're going to iterate for each object. So for each I, and in this loop, we're going to print I. So for each thing, it's going to print the thing. Okay, so on the next line, we have to indent 4 spaces and then input the instructions to be run. Since the loop is in a code block, all lines in the loop must be indented. So in the for loop, we have to indent before we give the instructions, and we have to make sure to put the colon at the end of the first line to indicate that there's going to be the start of a code block. Alright, so all for loops iterate over the contents of an object, typically a list. In fact, the range function creates a list with a series of numbers depending on the arguments given to it. Okay, so if we were to get the type for this range function over here, it would say that the type of object that it is a list. So these are for loops. So the other major type of loop in Python is the while loop. So here is while loops are loops that start with the keyword while, and then they're going to give an indication for when the loop is going to end. So, it's unlike the for loop, it does not have an assumed end condition. So over here, we've got a while loop, and it's going to be, while the count variable is less than 3, it's going to print the count variable, and then it's going to increase the count variable by 1. So this is going to repeat 3 times, and it's going to print 0, and then it's going to print 1, and then it's going to print 2, and then it's going to terminate. So here the loop keeps running until the count variable is no longer less than 3, and each iteration of the loop prints the value of the count, and then increases the value of the count by 1. So something we have to really pay attention to is when we use while loops, inside the while loop, there has to be something that happens in the while loop that's going to increment towards the end of the loop. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. So we can see that while loops and if conditionals are closely related, since each time a while loop iterates, it checks if its running condition is still true and ends if the statement is false. So each time this runs, it's going to count. It's going to check if count is less than 3. If it is false, then it's going to run. But if it's true, then it's going to terminate. So in the example, the loop runs over and over again while the statement supplied to it remains true. Oh, sorry. So each time it's going to check if this is true, and if it's true, it's going to run. Sorry about that. So if it's true, it runs. If it's false, then it's going to terminate. Once the count variable is incremented to 3, then count is less than 3 returns false, and the loop ends. So to write a while loop, we begin with the keyword while, and then the statement to be evaluated to true for the loop to execute, then a colon. So while count is less than 3, colon. And then on the next line, we indent 3 spaces because this is a code block. Then we input the loop's instructions. And then typically, the last loop instruction progresses a variable towards a state where the loop condition will return false. So typically the last instruction is going to progress the loop towards a condition where it's not going to run anymore. So what happens if we have a while loop that doesn't have a proper condition, proper end condition? This is what happens when this is going to be what is called an infinite loop. So what happens if a while loop is coded in such a way where the Boolean statement will never return false? The loop will never end naturally and creates what is called an infinite loop. So these kind of loops run forever until manually quit, or until the processor is basically stuck while the infinite loop progresses. Although there are cases where programmers want to create infinite loops in their programs, unintentional infinite loops effectively halt program execution, leading to system memory issues, crashes, or other problems. So infinite loops are definitely to be avoided. Okay, so let's take a look at what makes this an infinite loop before we move on. So it said there's a variable called count. It's equal to 1. So it says while count is not equal to 0, it's going to print the count, and it's going to iterate the count plus 1. So because the count already begins at a number that is greater than 0, then the count will never equal to 0, and that's what makes this an infinite loop. Alright, so the next thing we're going to learn is about the break statement. So break is a special keyword in Python, and it's an instruction we can insert into programming loops. So when the break statement is executed, the break instruction terminates execution of the current loop. So here, so this example also uses the while true style of loop, which is an infinite loop by default, and requires another means inserted within the loop to terminate the loop properly. For example, the break statement. Okay, so what's going on in this loop over here? We've got the count variable equal to 0. So while true, so it basically runs, unless something happens, it's going to run forever. It's going to print the count, and it's going to iterate the count. It's going to increase the count by 1. But if the count is equal to exactly 4, then it's going to break out of the loop. Okay, so we can see that this is going to go on for 4 times, and then after 4 times the count is going to equal 4, and then it's going to break. The next statement we're going to learn is the continue statement, and this is another statement that is used inside of loops. The continue statement is an instruction that stops execution of the current loop and begins a new iteration of the loop. It differs from the break statement because it doesn't terminate the whole loop, just the one iteration of it. So just one cycle of the loop is terminated, not the entire loop. So in this case, we've got a loop over here, and it says for I in range of 5. So this is going to be 0 to 4. If I modulo 2 is equal to 1, it's going to continue. So remember that modulo is going to give the remainder of a division operation. So if we divide the number by 2 and the remainder is 1, then we're going to reset. But if it's not, if it is not equal to 1 after you modulo it by 2, it's going to print something is an even number. So this is a loop that lets you know what the even numbers are in a list. Okay. So another thing we can do is the else clause. So else is something that happens in a loop. If something is not true, then the else clause is going to take effect. Just as we can use if conditionals within loops, we can use the else clause to execute instructions in the case that the if condition returns false. So in the previous loop, we had an instruction where there is a modulo of 2 to see if it's even or not. Okay, so modulo 2, if it returns 0, that means it's an even number, and here it's going to print something is an even number. But if that's false, then it's going to skip over to this else instruction, and the else instruction prints that it's an odd number. So in this case, we can have a loop that prints if these numbers are even or odd numbers. All right, so let's do our exercise. So let's practice using loops with Python at the following URL. So https python.org en loops. So I'm already here. I'm going to paste the link into chat for everybody. So the unfortunate thing about using JS Linux in this case is that we can't necessarily use the interactive Python window to test out our loops, but we can use this. We can use the learnpython.org window over here. So we've got a loop over here that says primes. So this list of primes here has this list of prime numbers here, and there's a loop over here for prime in primes. We're going to print the prime. So if we run this, it's going to iterate over this entire list, and it's going to print out all of the items in the list. So we run this, and in the IPython shell, it's 2, 3, 5, 7. So it's basically everything in the list over here. So on your screen, you might have the IPython shell and the script both on the screen at the same time if your screen is sufficiently wide. But if not, you can just click on the script.py tab and the IPython shell tab to switch between the two. Okay, so here it's explained that loops can iterate over a sequence of numbers using the range or xrange functions. So range, if we supply this range over here, it's going to include 6 numbers. No, it's going to include 5 numbers. The number is 0 to 4. And in the comments it says that this is going to print out 0 to 4. And this loop is going to print out this. Let me turn the volume down a little bit. Just a little bit. Okay, so in here, Entix says, we don't need that. So, but thank you very much for the message. Okay, so, and here, this loop over here is going to print x in the range of 3. It's going to start at 3. So if you give the range function starting 2 numbers, it's going to, the first number is going to be the starting number, and the last number is the number that's going to be, that's the stopping point of the range. So 3, 6 is going to print out 3, 4, and 5. So here we've got another one. We've got 3 numbers in the range function here, and in this case it starts at 3, it ends before 8, and it's going to skip every second number. So in this case it's 3, 5, and 7. So if we run this, we see that as the case. So it's kind of a jumble over here, but just know that these numbers correspond to these different loops over here. Okay? So next we take a look at the while loop, and the while loop repeats as long as the Boolean condition is met. So here we've got count equals 0. While count is less than 5, we're going to print the count, and then we're going to iterate the count by 1. So the count variable is going to increase by 1 each time. Okay, and this prints out 0 to 4. If we run this, that is the case. So after it runs 5 times, then count will be equal to 5, and then the while loop is going to end because the Boolean statement here is going to equate to false. All right, so here we take a look at the break and continue statements. All right, so once again, we start with a count variable, and it's this. In this case, it's while true. So if you remember, while true is an infinite loop by default, but there's usually going to be some way of breaking out of the loop inside of the loop instructions. So it's going to print the count, and it's going to increase the count by 1. And if the count is equal to or greater than 5, then it's going to break. So this loop here prints out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this one is going to print out only the odd numbers. So x in range, for x in range 10, so that's from 0 to 9, it's going to perform this modulo operation that checks if the modulo 2 is equal to 0. And if it is, it's going to continue. But if it if it is, it's going to continue and skip through and skip to the next iteration of the loop. But if it's not, then it's going to print. And in this way, we know that only the even numbers are going to print from this list. Okay, so next we learned, can we use the else clause for loops? So we can use the else clause for loops, just like we talked about earlier. We've got this loop over here. We have this count variable here, it's 0. And then while count is less than 5, it's going to print the count, and it's going to add 1 to the count. But if this is false, then it's going to print out the count reached x count. So this is going to, what this is going to do, it's going to print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to print out count value reached 5, and then it's going to terminate. And the next loop over here, for x in range 1, 10, which means it starts at 1 and it stops at 9. So for I in range, if I modulo 5 is equal to 0, it's going to break. So over here, it's going to perform the modulo operation And if it is not evenly divisible by 5, it's going to skip to the next. It's going to skip to the next iteration of the loop. And once we reach a number that is divisible by 5, then it's going to print. No, wait, no. If it's not evenly divisible by 5, then it's going to print. That's right, because this is going to print out 1, 2, 3, 4. But if all of this is false, then it's going to print. This is not printed for the loop is terminated because of the break due to fail in condition. Okay, so if for some reason all of this is not true, then it's going to print this, but it's not going to print this because this condition over here is never going to be false. So if we run this, then this is not going to be run. So here it prints out the 4 numbers before that's evenly divisible by 5, and then because this break happens before the else can happen, this else instruction is never run. Okay, so it's time for you guys to try some programming out for yourself. This is the exercise portion. The exercise portion asks us to loop through and print out all of the even numbers from the list in the order they are received, but we're not going to print any numbers that come after the number 237 in the sequence. So it looks like we get to do a for loop, and we have to remember to only print out the even numbers. Remember, there is a part of the code up here in some of the examples that only printed out even or odd numbers. Okay, so if it's an even number, then we're going to print. So what I want you to do is I want you to add to this code over here for number in numbers, and then write the loop. When you're finished and you run, you press the run button, and it says that you successfully completed the exercise. Please type in the chat loop for loops, and then add the smiley face, just like this. All right, so give it a go now. In a couple of minutes, we're going to show the solution for this exercise. So first, let's figure out how to do the instruction where if the modulo for 2 is equal to an odd number, then it's going to skip that particular number. So in this case, it's going to be if number modulo 2 is equal to 1, then we're going to continue. But above this particular instruction here, we have to include the first instruction. And of course, if all of this goes through, then we have to print the number. So the first thing we have to do inside of this code block is we have to check if the number is equal to 237 in the sequence, because we can't print any numbers that go after 237 in the sequence over here. In this case, we can check if, whoops, Pandas asks, it's Python, right? This is Python, correct. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to write a little loop that's going to run through all of these numbers and check if they're even numbers. If it's an even number, then it's going to print the number, and otherwise it's going to skip and go to the next loop. And if the number is equal to 237, then the loop is going to break. So if number is equal to 237, we have to give it the break instruction. Ilhan Idris says, hello Ildran Idris. We're here doing our Python workshop. We're learning about basic Python stuff. We're working on our loops right now. Okay, so, oops, we have to spell break correctly. Okay, so what happens here? So for number in numbers, and numbers is a big list of numbers over here. First, if the number is equal to 237, then we're going to break. But if not, if the number is not equally divisible by 2, then we're going to loop back and go into another iteration of the loop. Otherwise, it's going to print the number, and that is a solution for this particular exercise. So let's run this. Okay, so the script is going to print out all of these even numbers over here until it reaches 218, and after 218, then we're going to hit 237. Where is it in here? 237. So it's right here. So after 918, it hits 237, and then it terminates the loop because this check right here causes the break instruction. Okay, great. All right, so before we move on, let's do our quiz. Ilhan Idris says, I am currently learning Python too. Well, I'm happy to hear that. I hope you can learn something from today's workshop. Okay, so let's move on to the exercise. Sorry, let's move on to the quiz. So, everybody, I want you to take a look at this particular block of code over here and answer the question, when will the programming loop end? Either A, B, or C. Okay, so I'm going to copy this code into the chat. You can try pasting this into the Python learnpython.org window and see when this programming loop ends. And if you have an answer for me, please answer A, B, or C. So we've got a list over here. It's got 1, 2, and 3. So for each number in mylist. We're going to print the number, and then we're going to append. We're going to append a number to the list equal to num plus 1. In this case, when is the programming loop going to end? Okay, so Layla F says the answer is C. So the answer is this loop will never end. And the reason it's never going to end is because each time the loop iterates, something is going to be added to the list, which means that this for loop is never going to end because it's never going to run out of numbers. If we run this inside of the learnpython.org shell, it looks like it's not executing. Let me try again. Let me try this in JS Linux. So I'm going to quickly put this into Nano. I'm going to call up list mylist.py. I'm going to reload this. Okay, and then we're going to paste this in. Okay, then I'm going to run python mylist mylist.py. Whoops. And it keeps on going forever because the numbers are continuously added to the list. Okay, so the next question is this list right here, when will the programming loop end? Okay, so while true, count equals 0, print the count, and then count equals count plus 1. If the count is equal to 3, break. I'm going to copy this into the chat. So does it stop after the number 2 is printed? Does it stop after the number 3 is printed? Or is this loop never going to end? So remember that while true is by default an infinite loop. Ilhanager says maybe it's C. Okay, so before we go to the answer, I'm going to prep this in the mylist.py window over here. I'm going to paste these instructions in. Oh, this looks all funky. Let me so print count equals count plus 1, if count Oh, Drea S says hello. Hello, Drea S. Lila F says it's B. Okay, so Drea S says I'm from Genius Group also. Yes, I remember your name, Drea S. Okay, so if we run this script, Python my list, even though there's no list in here. Whoops. If count. Oh, sorry. It has to be. It has to be if count is equal. You have to use the double equal signs here. Okay, and then we run this. Okay, it does 0 over and over again. So the answer over here is going to be this loop will never end. And the answer, the reason for that is because the count value is inside of the loop. So what we need is for the count value to be outside of the loop for this loop to work. If we put the count equals 0 inside of the loop, then each time the loop runs, then count is going to equal 0. Even if we print it and then we increase the value for count, and the next time it runs, it's going to reset the count to 0 again. And that's why this is an infinite loop. Okay, so the next question is, when will the programming loop end? Okay, we've got count equal to 0, and then while count is, hold on, it's supposed to be this. Count equals 0 while count is greater than 5, is less than 5, it's going to print the count, and then the count equals count plus 1. So when does this end? Is it A, B, or C? I'll copy this into the chat as well. Oh, the music's gotten kind of funky. I'm gonna switch to the next one. So I'm gonna paste this into the learnpython.org website. So does this count until 4, until 5, or is this another endless loop? Okay, so let's find out the answer. Ilhan Idris says that the answer is A. Okay, so let's run. Summerella also says that the answer is A. Well, welcome to the workshop, Summerella. Nice to see you here. Okay, so if we run this inside of the learnpython.org website, it says it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a proper loop with a proper endpoint, but it goes until 4. All right. So for the people who said that the answer is A, Idris Ilhan and Samarella, good job. Thank you very much. All right, so let's move on to part 2, where we're going to take a look at functions. So functions are a very important part of Python. In fact, we've been using a function all this time, the print function. So the print function is a built-in function in Python, and programming functions are defined instructions that can be used multiple times in the same code. So functions are very useful for programmers anytime we want to do the same operation more than once. If a specific set of instructions needs to be run multiple times in the same code, it is more efficient to create a function out of those instructions rather than input the same instructions again. In fact, we've been making use of the most common Python function this whole time, the print function. Any arguments that the function requires to execute properly, if any, are provided inside the parentheses when calling, or running the function. So you'll hear people talk about function calls. That just means that you're running the function inside the code. So this instruction over here, print, is a function call. So let's talk about how to create functions. Okay, so we have to use this keyword right here called def. To create a function, we start with def, then the name of the function, then a pair of parentheses with any arguments required inside the parentheses, and then a colon. So it's going to start just like this. It's going to be def, and then the name of the function, and then the parentheses, and anything we need inside the parentheses over here, and then the colon. Oops. Since a function is a code block, on the next line we have to indent, the default is 4 spaces, and then input the function's instructions. If the instructions span multiple lines, each line must be indented. Any argument variable should be included in the instructions. Okay, so if we have this variable called myGreeting with a name, we have to include the name variable as the name argument as a variable inside of the instructions over here. So this is going to print a string, and it's going to be greetings and then name with the string formatting over here that we learned last class. So here, our example function is defined, then the function is called with the corresponding output shown thereafter. Okay, so we have this myGreeting function over here is going to print greetings name, and if we were to call it with the name ShyHat as the argument, then it's going to print greetings ShyHat. Who's ShyHat? That's me. Anyways, next. Ilhan Idris says, I use this a lot when I'm doing a project with Django. That's right, Django is it's a framework inside of Python, I do believe. Next we'll talk about the return statement. So return is an instruction that can be used in functions. When used, return is going to store the value specified, but it doesn't print it out to the console. So we see here, we're making a function called sales tax calculator with the amount as the argument. It's going to create this variable called sales tax, and it's equal to 1.15, and it's going to return the amount, which is the argument over here, and it's going to multiply it by the sales tax. So if we were to run this function over here with 55.00, what's going to print to the console? Well, the answer is nothing, because the return instruction doesn't print anything. It just stores a value. So the return portion of a function is useful for passing values to other parts of the program, but it's not going to output anything to the console unless we use the print function with it. So if we were to create this function over here, and then we run the print function with the function call over here, then we're going to be able to print out the correct the output of the function to the console, just like this. Okay? All right, so let's go over to the programming functions exercise in mypython.org, learnpython.org. And so we just need to go down here and click on the next tutorial button. Sometimes this website can be kind of slow. So let's go to the link over here, functions. And I'm going to paste that in the chat for everybody. So in the first example here, first example header over here, it says, how do you write functions in Python? So this one we can skip. And it says, in here, it gives an example of defining a function over here. So my function is, so in this case, the my function is going to execute this instruction over here. It's going to print hello from my function. All right, so this by itself doesn't do anything, but what we can do is we can give it a function call inside of the code. So my function, and then we have to include the parentheses over here. So if we run it with the my function call at the end over here, then it's actually going to do the function instructions. So if we run this, then it's going to do hello for my function. But if we don't do the function call, then it's not going to print anything. This is from the previous one. Okay. So functions may also receive arguments. Arguments are variables passed from the caller to the function, for example. So there's this other function over here, my function with arguments, and it has two arguments over here, two parameters. It's going to be a username and a greeting. So these are both going to be strings. So the function is going to print this string over here. So hello something, hello username from my function I wish you greeting, where it's going to take username and greeting, and it's going to print out in this string format over here. So what we would do to run this is we would run my function with args. And then you have to supply two strings separated by a comma. So the first one is the username. So it's my name is the Shy Hat, and I wish you a good day, let's say. All right, and if we were to run this, then it's going to print out hello, the Shy Hat, from my function I wish you a good day. Oh, my function, okay, what did I do wrong? My function, did I spell it wrong? Oh, my functions with args. Okay, it should be function with args. Okay, and if we run this, then we should get our print stuff over here. Okay, and that's what happened. Okay, so next, functions may return a value to the caller using the keyword return. For example, we're creating a function called sum two numbers with a and b, and it's going to return a and b. So what we have to remember is that unless we print, and we use print with this, print, and then we have to use sum two numbers, and then we have to add the two numbers in here. So it's one, let's say 25 and 1. So it's going to add up these two numbers, but if we don't print it, it normally is not going to return anything to the console. So we run this, and we should get the number 26. Okay, just like this. All right, so the next section says how, next section asks, how do you call Python's, how do you call functions in Python? So we have to use the name of the function with the parentheses and then the arguments that we need in the parentheses. So my function over here and my function with arguments over here and even this over here. We can even create a variable which is equal to function call. So x is equal to the sum two numbers function with the arguments 1 and 2. So we can call this, we can get the results from x, the variable x, by printing x. And x should be equal to 3. So if we run this, it's going to get, we have 3 function calls, this one, and this one, and this one. So it should be hello for my function, and then John Doe, great year, hello for my function, and then the last one should be the number 3. Okay, and that's exactly what we see. All right, so here's the exercise. This one is a little bit complicated, but we're going to go through it slowly, and hopefully some of us can finish the exercise before we move on to the next subject in this workshop. So in the exercise, we're going to use an existing function. We're going to add our own to create a fully functional program. So number 1, we're going to add a function called list benefits that returns the following list of strings over here. And this is what you're going to need to solve this exercise. You're going to have to copy and paste these strings right here and put them in a list. And then we're going to add a function named build sentence with the argument info, which receives a string argument containing a string and returns a sentence starting with the given string and ending with the string is a benefit of functions. Okay, then we're going to run it and see all the functions work together. So in the code over here, what we need to do is we need to add, first of all, in the list benefits function, we're going to need to return all of these strings and add them to the list. And then in the build sentence function over here, we're going to have to return the benefit and then the string is a benefit of functions. And then the third step is to just run it and see all the functions work together. All right, so we're going to take a couple of minutes to try to solve this. After a couple of minutes, I'm going to start solving this exercise. And but if you do manage to solve the exercise ahead of time, please type, let's see, functions are awesome in the chat, and then add your smileys. So just remember, for the first one over here, for the list benefits function over here, we just need to insert the different strings as list items inside of this list right here. So that's all we need to do for list benefits function. But for the build sentence function over here, we're going to have to include the argument benefit inside of the return somehow, and then we're going to need to add the string is a benefit of functions, and this string right here is literally going to go inside of the return function right here. But you should probably change this these double quotes to single quotes to put it in here, because this already has double quotes over here. Okay, so like we said, for the first function, we just need to copy all this stuff over here, and then put it into the return, just like that. And for the build sentence function over here, we have to return the benefit. And then we had to add is a benefit of functions over here. So we copy that. And we have to make sure to include a space over here. And this code over here is going to solve the exercise. So put all together, it iterates through each one of the benefits of functions. So for example, more organized code, more readable code, easier code reuse, and allowing programmers to share and connect code together. And then it's going to concatenate the string is a benefit of functions onto that, and it's going to run through that until the list is finished. All right, so let's move on to the quiz. So the first question is, what will print to the console? So we've got a function over here, function definition. So add numbers A and B. It's going to return A plus B with A and B as the arguments. So if we were to run this, or to do the function call with these arguments, what's going to print to the console? A, the number 5, B, there's a syntax error in the code, or C, nothing will be printed to the console. So I'll copy and paste this to the chat. And Idris Ilhan says, is it A? Okay, so what we're going to do before we reveal the answer is we're going to go into our JS Linux, and we're going to create this in the JS Linux. Layla F says there's a syntax error in the code. Okay, so let's create this in with nano functions.py. Okay, and I'm going to paste this in. Okay, and then we're going to run this Python functions.py. there was a syntax error in the. Okay, so let's add the proper syntax. Remember, everybody, anytime you define a code block, you have to add the colon at the end. I forgot to do so. Okay, so let's try doing that again. So we're going to Python this, and nothing is going to appear because we didn't use print. So the answer is B, because I forgot to put the colon over here, but the answer was supposed to be nothing is going to be printed to the console, because if we return something and then we do the function call, but then there's only return but there's no print, then nothing's going to be printed to the console. So Layla F is correct. Good job, Layla F. Okay, the second quiz question is, what is going to print to the console in this case? So we've got my number as the variable equal to 7, and then we have, this time I remembered to put the colon over here. So set my number, and with a number, and it's going to, what it's going to do is it's going to set the my number variable to the number, and then we're going to call my number. We're going to call number set with the argument 14, and then we're going to print the my number variable. So what's going to print? Is it going to be the number 7 or the number 14? And I'll copy this code over here, and I'm going to paste it in the chat for you guys as well. Okay, Elhanager says the answer is B. The answer is B because there is no call function. There's no call function. Well, we do do the function call number set with the number 14, and the function sets the variable my number to the number 14. But right. So this is what I want to illustrate with this particular question. So Summerella says A. Okay, so if we insert this code into the MyPython script over here, and then we run it, we get the number 7. So no worries, Ildris, Ilhan. So the point here is that stuff that's done inside of a function can't affect global variables outside of the function. So my number is set to 7, but this inside of the function over here, it's going to set the number for my number to 14. But because it's done within the function, it doesn't affect the global variable over here, unless you set this inside of the function itself. I asked ChatGPT, how do you have functions in Python affect global variables? So you have to use a global keyword to affect global variables. So in this case, we have to use global and then the name of the variable in order to declare that the function is going to work on global variables. So if we were to use global and then, so if we change this and we set in the first global my number, then this function will affect the global variable 7, the global variable my number, and it will set it to 14. So let's copy this and then run it again, and it should say 14 this time. Okay, so this time it does come out 14. So this is just something that we should keep in mind when we're making our functions. That by default we can't affect global variables with our functions unless we set it inside of the function itself. Just something to think about. Okay, so the answer was it's the number 7 because we didn't set the global keyword inside of the function. So this wasn't taught before, but it's just something that we should keep in mind because it's something that that people have problems with when they're writing larger Python programs. Okay, so let's do the final portion of today's workshop. It's going to be objects and classes. Okay, so Python is an object-oriented programming language, OOP, and as such, all pieces of data in Python code are considered objects. So my integer over here is an object, my float over here is an object, my string here is an object. And if we type what kind of thing they are, it's going to return that these are part of different classes. So these are all objects, but when we use this function over here to get the type of object it is, in this case, for my integer, it's going to do class int. For type my float, it's going to do class float. And for the string, it's going to be class string. So string is the class of object, what type of object it is, but everything here is an object. In addition, all objects in Python are separated into different classes. We see that the 3 variables here are in the integer, float, and string classes, respectively. So an objects class indicates what built-in functions, methods, and variables it has. So for string objects, you can run the length function on strings, because that's one of the functions that's associated with strings in Python. And you can use the method upper to print the string in all uppercase, because .upper is a method that is part of the string class in Python. So here we've executed a function and the method on the myString variable. Both the len function and the upper method are unique to the string class. But if we changed the myString value to an integer, executing either the len function or the upper method would result in an error message. So if we changed myString to a number, then the error that comes up is integer objects have no attribute upper. So that's what it finds over here. Okay, so what do we do when we want to create classes? So there are a lot of inbuilt classes inside of Python already. So there's integers and objects. Sorry, there's integers and floats and strings and lists. But if we wanted to create our own class, we would have to begin with the class keyword and then the name of the class and then a colon. And then the first name of the class is capitalized. So here we're making a class of object called a student. So we begin with class and then capitalize the name of the class over here and then add the colon. So on the next line we would have to indent because this is a code block over here, and then we use the def keyword and then the double underscore init double underscore, and then a pair of parentheses, and then inside the parentheses self, and then any other attributes the class requires, and a colon. So what I want you to understand is that we can create classes inside of Python, but most of the time, if we're beginning with our Python journey, we don't really need to create new classes. But it's nice to know how to do it just in case. So one important feature of class creation is defining the init function, which specifies the attributes of class. So in the case that where we're creating a class of object called a student, so we're going to do the init function over here, and in this case we're going to give the student a name and a favorite subject. So if we have a student, we're going to give it a name and a favorite subject. So, and in this case, we have to specify that self.name equals the name of the student, and self.favSubject equals the fav subject that we indicate over here. So if we were to create an object inside of the student class, we would have to say that the variable, in my case, we create this object over here called CryptoGuy. It's going to be a student object. Sorry, it's going to be a student class with CryptoGuy as the name and cryptography as the favorite subject. So one attribute which all classes share is the self attribute, which is used to access other attributes and methods of the class inside the code. So we have to use the self attribute to get the classes attributes in which case we have name and fav subject. We have to use self to reference the object itself. All right, so let's move on to the classes and objects exercise. Let's copy Hussein Ismail, just subscribed. Thank you very much. Okay, so let me grab the link for you guys. Classes and objects. Copy the link and put. And then I will click on that. Okay, so objects are an encapsulation of variables and functions into a single entity. So objects are basically anything inside of Python. Almost everything inside of Python is an object. And all objects have a class. So a very basic class would look something like this. So the class, my class, has a class variable equal to the string blah. And maybe we have a function that this class can do, and it's going to print this is a message inside this class. So classes can have different functions and methods that only objects of that class can do. So the self parameter is a little bit easier to understand. So if we have this, let's see. So in this case, what we're trying to illustrate is how we can create an object of a new class. So if we create a class equal to my class, then we would have to create a variable. So the variable would, in this case, is my object X, and it's going to be an instance of my class, an object of the my class category. All right. So next we're going to talk about accessing object variables. So if we've got the class, my class, and it has a variable with the string of blah over here, and it has a function that prints this is a message inside the class, we could create the object of my class by creating a variable, my object X, and then we can do a method call by doing my object X dot variable, and the variable is the string blah. So if we were to print this, then it should what should output to the console is the string blah, right? So blah. Okay, great. Okay, so and that's exactly what they explain over here in the next window, great. Okay, so we can create multiple different objects that are of the same class. However, each object contains independent copies of the variable defined for the class. So what we're trying to explain here is that even though we create an object that's of a specific class, we can also change the variables of the object in the class. So in this case, there's a variable equal to blah, and each one of these objects, my object X and my object Y, are going to have this variable equal to blah because they're of the my class, right? But we can set the variables for the specific objects by accessing the variable, in this case by doing myObject y.variable, and we can set a new value. In this case, it's called yakety. So in this case, if we were to print out the variable for object x and object y, then they would have different values. So one would have blah, and one would have yakety. And if we run this, we say this is the case. So after we've created the objects of a specific class, we can change the variable, the class variables, after they've been created. Okay, so there are also functions inside of specific classes. For example, there was the len function that can only be used with strings. In this case, there's the myClass class over here, and we've got a function that prints, this is a message inside the class. So this function is going to print this message. So what we would do to access it, just like any other method, is that we would do the name of the object, in this case myObject x, and then a dot, and then the name of the method, and then the parentheses. And in this case, it's going to print this message right here. This is a message inside the class, because this is the function inside of the myClass class. Okay, so if we run this, then this prints out, because we're accessing the function inside of the class from the object over here. Okay, so there's a special function inside of classes called the init function over here. So it's this double underscore init double underscore. What we have to understand is inside of Python, this double underscore is usually called a dunder score. So dunder underscore init means double underscore init and then double underscore again. So this is a special function that's used when a class is being initiated. It's used for assigning values in a class. So we have our class called number holder in this case, and inside of the creation code block, we're going to use this init function, and we're going to give self and a number. And if you remember from the explanation just a little while ago, self is always going to be there when you use init, and it refers to the object itself. And then this number is going to be another attribute of the class objects. So in this case, we set self.number equal to a number. I guess in this case, when we set the, what is this called, number holder class, we're going to set a number that it holds. And in this case, there's a function inside of this class called return number, and it's going to return self.number, which is the number that was defined when we create the object. Okay, so in this case, we've got a variable which is the object number holder with the number 7 as its attribute, right? So if we print this object name dot return number, which is the function inside of the number holder class, then it's going to print out the number that it was assigned when we created the object, in which case it's 7. Okay, so if you run this, it's going to print 7. Okay, great. Okay, so for our exercise for today, this isn't the last exercise we do today, but this is the exercise for classes and objects. So we have a class defined for vehicles. We're going to create 2 new vehicles called car1 and car2. We're going to set car1 to be a red convertible worth $60,000 with the name of Fur, and we're going to do car 2, which is a blue van named Jump worth $10,000. Okay, so we're going to try to create 2 objects inside of this code over here that have these different attributes, right? So I'm going to make it a little easier for you guys because this is kind of a hard exercise to throw at you guys all of a sudden. So I'm going to do the first one. So we're going to do car 1. So car 1 is going to be equal to the vehicle class. And then we have to put our parentheses over here, and then we're going to set the variables. So car1 dot name is going to be equal to the string fer, and then we're going to continue with car1 dot kind, because kind, we need to set the kind to a convertible, right? Okay, so with this finished over here, what I want you to do is I want you to finish off the different attributes for car 1, and then I'm going to have you guys do car 2 on your own. And when you're finished and you run the program and it says that you finished the exercise, I want you to type in the chat car vroom vroom with some smiley faces. All right. So let's try to finish this one on our own. I'll come in to finish, to plug in the answers for this exercise in a little bit, but let's take a couple minutes to try to solve the exercise ourselves first. I've been meaning to update our workshop progress over here, but I've been forgetting all this time. Okay, so let's start filling in the rest of the information for car 1. So car1.color, we're going to set that to red. And we're going to set the value of the car as well. And then we need to just do the same for car 2. Okay, so this right here are all of the. This is everything we need to input for this exercise here. We're going to run this, and it should complete the exercise. Okay. All right. So with that out of the way, let's move on to our quiz, and then we'll do the final exercise for the night. Okay, so, all right, so the quiz question here is, which of the following are statements regarding the relationship between a class and an instance? Which of the following statements regarding the relationship between a class and an instance is false? So A class is a blueprint for creating objects, and an instance is an object belonging to a class. B, instances of class have all the attributes and methods of their class. C, the class variables of instances. The class variables of instances and all of their associated class can be different. And although this says all of the above, I made a mistake over here. It should be none of the above. So when you're answering the question, remember that D is supposed to be none of the above, not all the above. So in this case, it should be none of the above because these are all correct. A class is a blueprint for creating objects, and an instance is an object belonging to a class. So instances of a class have all the attributes and methods of the class, and the class variables of instances and their associated class can be different, just as was illustrated while we went through the exercises. Question 2 is, which of the following is not considered objects in the Python programming languages? In the Python programming language. Okay, so we know that because Python is a object-oriented programming language, almost everything inside the Python is considered an object. But which of these are not considered objects? So is it operators like plus, minus, divided by, multiplied by, etc.? Is it variables such as integers, lists, strings, etc.? Is it keywords like if, else, for, and while? Or is it A and C? Which are not considered objects? All right, everybody, I'd like you to know that when you're learning a programming language, it is completely legitimate to use stuff like ChatGPT to get your answers. So in this case, we can ask questions like, what is not considered an object in the Python programming language? So these things are not objects. So for example, keywords and operators, also statements, built-in types, modules. So in this case, the answer is A and C. All right, so before we finish, let's write a program which features many of the concepts we learned in this workshop. We can use a window in the learnpython.org website to write the program. So the program is going to have two lists. It's going to have one list with 4 colors, red, blue, red, green, and yellow. And it's going to have another list with 5 fruits, apple, orange, grape, banana, and watermelon. The program should have a function which loops through a list, printing out each item. The function should be called twice, once for each list. So everybody, we need to have these things. We're going to have one list, another list, and a function that iterates and prints out each item in the list. And then we're going to call that function once for each list. All right, so let's try to write the function on our own before going over the answer. So you'll know that you've gotten the answer correct when you call the function twice, once with each list, and you get the list, each item in the list. If you finish and you think you have a good program, please type in the chat, review done, with some smiley faces. So I'll copy the instructions over here into the chat, and I'm going to start writing up the program for this exercise. Okay, so let's create list 1 and list 2. And we need a bunch of strings. So what are these items? It's going to be blue, whoops, is green and yellow. And the second list is apple, orange, grape, banana, watermelon. Okay, then we have to create a function, def my function. Let's call it my function. Oh, I need to reset my music. Hold on. Okay. So the function is going to do a loop for item in okay, we need a list for I in list, print I. So I think this is as complicated as the function is going to be. and then we're going to do my function with list1, and then my function with list2. Okay, so if we run this, then we get the contents of both of the lists. Okay, so this is essentially what we did. This is essentially the code we just wrote right there. All right, so let's review the programming concepts we learned in this workshop before we finish the workshop. Loops are tools that programmers use to run the same instructions multiple times. Loops can either run a preset number of times before terminating or iterate through all items in a list or string in the case of for loops, or run continuously until a predetermined trigger state is achieved in the case of while loops. Functions are defined blocks of code that can be executed multiple times in the same program. Executing a function is usually referred to as calling a function or function call. Python is an object-oriented programming language, and as such, all data in Python code are considered objects. All objects belong to a class, and an object's class indicates which built-in functions, methods, and variables it has. In the next HackerFrogs AfterSchool programming workshop, we're going to conclude our intro to Python with the learnpython.org website. So our next workshop's topics are going to be dictionaries and modules and packages. So everybody, I'm going to be doing an extra workshop on Python, and we're going to be covering a module in the tryhackme.com website that deals with Python. It's going to be basically a big review of all the stuff we learned up until this point. Ilhan Idris asked me, do you teach data structure? Data structure I do not teach in this particular course. It's a little bit advanced for what I want, for what I'm aiming for, which is kind of aiming at teaching kind of a crash course on Python. So everybody who's still here, if you could fill out the survey for this workshop, which was asked, what was it? The Black Girls Hack organization asked me to pass this out to participants for today's workshop. It helps me improve my workshop, and it helps me identify what parts of the workshop could use some help. But thank you very much for everybody for attending today. Like I said, I'll be back on Wednesday, and at the same time, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through our extra credit class on Python, going through the Python module inside of tryhackme.com. But thank you very much to everybody who came by. Thank you very much to Ilhan Idris for participating, as well as Layla F, Samarella, and Drea S. And thank you very much for coming today. Please have a great day, and we will see you next time.